Hey, I'm Param from Perspective, the company behind open source data visualization library called Perspective. Perspective is a great tool for visualizing fast-moving large data sets. It's written in C and it runs natively in your browser via WebAssembly, enabling you to render thousands or millions of data points all at once. In this guide, I'm going to cover how the UI works, and we're going to see the basic functionalities of the tool. Once you log into perspective.co, this is what you're going to see. So if you have your own data set, right away you can start visualizing it by clicking on the Create New Project. Or you can choose to open one of our pre-existing dashboards and an example to get you started. What I'm going to recommend is that you click on the login and create a new account for yourself. That's going to enable some features like saving the dashboards so you can come back to them and work on them in the future. So what we're going to do, we're going to start by clicking a new project. The very first thing when we create a new project is to connect Perspective to a data source and load a data set that we want to visualize. And we can do that by opening the Sources tab up here. By default, you see a lot of our data adapters that are available. Some of these are publicly GA and available that are not grayed out, and the other ones that are grayed out are available in our commercial license. You can connect and load data from local file system, from an HTTP source, from S3, or a Perspective server. In this case, I'm going to choose the HTTP one, and this one already has a data set pre-configured, which is our superset demo data set. This is kind of like resembles an online retail store, and each data set comes with its own configuration. If you have your own, you can change the configuration here, and once everything is okay, click Connect and Load Table. And once you do that, the data source is fetched, and you can see the default data grid view that pops up. And now we can close the Sources tab. It's important to note that I can always come back to Sources tab and add new sources for different tables to be viewed side by side, or delete the sources later that I'm not using anymore. Once I load a data source in Perspective, I'm going to see all the data columns of my data set in the default data grid view. And this is where I can go and start changing the configurations to show exactly what I want. I can right click and open the setting tabs anywhere on the chart, or my favorite way to open the settings is actually by clicking the title bar and start giving this chart a name right away. Let's call this a Superstore data grid. And you can see that the settings tab, or the settings panel, is open here to the right. From the top, I can start by changing the chart type, and each one of these chart types is going to have its own settings. You can see a list of available chart types, which, like for example, like the tree map, the map scatter, the Y charts, and the candlestick charts that are really good for financial data sets. But let's stay with the data grid and cover some of the basics that I want to show you, and those pretty much apply across all different chart types. By default, all the columns are selected to view. I can always deselect any columns that I want to exclude from my dashboard or select them back in. I can also reorder the columns by drag and dropping them where I want. Also, I can change the settings for each individual column. For example, the order date, if I click the settings icon, I can change the date format or the foreground or the background color of the column itself. I can also see a list of automatically detected data types of the column. So here you can see the string columns marked with an A, the date columns that have a calendar icon, and the number columns that have a number icon. All right, let's close the column settings and let's start applying visualization or aggregations on top of our data. So I can apply group by just typing the first few letters of my column name and then selecting that column. Now I'm grouping by state, and you can see all the values now are aggregated. Right away, you're going to see the aggregation method next to each one of the columns. Again, Perspective automatically detects and chooses the best aggregation function, but I can always change these to anything that I want. So for row ID, for example, let's take the last, for count for the order ID, sum for cells and quantities, and etc. I'm going to show you a good trick here. Again, by default, all the columns are selected, but you can also kind of work backwards. So if there's only one column that you want to select, you can hold down Shift and then select that column. So I can now only view cells, and let's start adding columns back into our dashboard. So I'm going to also select profit. Let's take the quantity as well. Let's take shipping date. And let's also take the row ID. And I'm going to now start customizing this the way I want. So I want the count of row IDs. I'm going to take the last shipping date, or maybe the most dominant shipping date, and the sums of all the other columns. I can apply multiple group bys. So if I'm grouping by state, maybe I want to also group by city underneath each state, and you can see the group by is being added here. Split by is very nice if I want to see a side-by-side comparison of my different grouping buckets. Let's say I want to see categories of different product or sales that I have in the split fashion. So if I choose category, and you can see now I get a side-by-side comparison of each one of my product categories still bucketed by the group by columns here. And you can again add as many as these group bys or split by columns, and that's going to just granularly apply the aggregations down. The other thing to notice here is my order by. That's just the way I want my data sorted. So if I want to order by sales, and let's get that in a descending order. So my top or highest selling state by group by is going to be on top, and then it's going to go down. And also my highest city within that state. So I can see Los Angeles has the most amount of sales, and then it's San Francisco, San Diego within California. You can always change the order by or sorting order. Here in this case, you're sorting now across the splits, backweighting splits, no sorting, again, descending or ascending order. I can also put filter or where clause conditions on the data. So if I only want to see data in state of California, I can say state and then choose the value. Let's say we're going to choose California, just type the first few letters and then click the option that's available. At any point, if I'm not happy with any of these aggregations or customizations that I have, I can just take those off. So it's very easy to add or remove any of the customizations that I have. So I'm going to remove the order by as well. Maybe I'll also remove the group by for the city. Now, before we move on to different chart types, I want to show you a very handy feature here, which is saving the dashboard. At any point, if you want to save your work, you can come up here to the title and you can give this dashboard a name and then click the save icon up here. What that does is going to generate a hash URL of my dashboard. If I'm again logged into Prospective, next time I'm going to come in and log in, I'm going to see this save dashboard on my front page. But the other thing that this allows me to do, if this dashboard is public, is connected to public data sources, I can also just copy and paste this URL link, send it to my friend or colleague, and they can open it and see exactly the same dashboard the way I have it configured. And they can make their own modifications on top of it, save their own version, come back. So it's very easy to share and collaborate with others as well. Now, as someone who gets really jazzed about data visualization, you might always find yourself going back and forth between the different chart types and really choosing the one that best represents your data set. So let's go and dig into some of these chart types. Each one has its own configurations, and I'll let you, again, kind of go further and dig in further from there. I'm still viewing my superset demo data set that's available by default from our HTTP data source, and I've applied some aggregations and split by conditions on top of this. Now, let's say I want to compare sales by state. Maybe one of the ways I want to compare that is by a Y chart. So I'm going to click Y chart, and right away you can see that the settings change here. I can start adding columns to my Y chart, but since I want the sales, I'm going to drag and drop the sales over the row ID and then deselect the row ID, and this is good. I want to get the sum. You can also see that the group by columns in the Y chart, in the Y bar chart, is going to apply to my x-axis down here. If I further want to do group by, so if I want to get group by city, then you can see each state gets divided into prospective cities. Also, the split by columns, you can see the side-by-side comparison in each bar of the split by columns, and they are shown by the different columns. So the technology category is in purple, and I have furniture here, down here is blue. Again, you can apply any ver clause or order bys as I want to, and I can, again, add categories or subcategories. But maybe the better way of doing this is let's come and group by category. And instead of splitting by, we can do split by state. And I flip this order. And now you can see, again, the different categories of my cells, and within each category, how much of each state is attributing to that category's cells. Let's see a couple different chart types. Maybe the better way of actually seeing this is going to be, let's say, a tree map. So once I switch to a tree map, now again, you can see side by side, the split by columns are going to be different tree map views, and then my categories are grouped by within each split by. Let's flip this order again. Maybe we want to do by state, remove the category, and then I'm going to split by. Now, let's pause here for a second. Okay, you can see now as a tree map how much each state is contributing to the overall cells. So you can see definitely California by far has the biggest area, New York, Texas, Washington. These are some of the dominant states, and some of the smaller states, like for example, South Dakota is hiding right down here. Let's put the split by back in. So let's start splitting by category. So now in each category, I can see how much each state is contributing to the sales of that category. So for example, in technology, again, across each category, it seems like California has the biggest contribution, but here, maybe New York has the biggest contribution in technology versus office supplies. Okay, maybe a better way of doing this. One last chart type is a pie chart. Again, I can choose any of these chart types that are available to me at any moment, and you can switch between them. Each one of these chart types is going to have its own configuration based on that chart type, but pretty much the same configuration applies across all of them, the same methods. I'll let you go ahead and discover these, and I highly encourage you to go and explore as much as you can yourself. Remember, at any point, if you're happy with this setting, you can save your work and then come back to it later. One of the really handy features within Perspective is the ability to apply transformations or custom expressions on top of any column or columns values. That allows us to apply, again, business logics, transformation, or even any data cleaning on top of any columns that we have to get it to exactly be the form that we want for our data visualization. Let's see how to do that. So I'm using our superset demo dataset, which is available by default from our HTTPS data connector. Let's apply some basic data visualization first. So I'm going to get the total of all my cells per each state. So I'm going to do a group by per state, and I'm only going to select the sales column by holding down Shift and selecting cells, which deselects everything else. This is good. I'm showing the sum of cells by state. Let's say I want to now get how much taxes I owe on each state, and that's a function of the cells. Let's say 10% of sales is the amount of tax that I owe. So I'm going to create a new expression column, and the expression column tab opens up here. First, I'm going to give this column a name, so I'm going to edit the name on the title here, and then I can apply my expression. To get a column value, wrap the column name in double quotes. So I'm going to get the total of sales, so that gets the value of my sales column, and I'm going to multiply that by, let's say, 10%, and then I can hit create. As you type, you also see that expression is automatically getting compiled, so if there's any errors or in your syntax, you're going to see that right away. But this looks good. I'm going to say create. And that pops open a new column here, and I can use that anywhere in my visualization. So I'm going to drag and drop that onto my data grid, and now you can see that in each state, 10% of the cells is attributed to the tax. Now, the syntax of the expression column is within a language called ExpressTK. I'm going to post a link to this, to the documentation, but here's just a quick overview. This language provides a number of different functions, arithmetic functions, mathematical functions like sine, cosine, log, as well as flow control logic here. Let's try some of that. Let's say, let's apply a business logic, something that's a little bit more complex. So let's say I want to get the total sales, but the sales really is a function of state. You know, state of California might have 10%, instead of New York, I have 15% tax, and everywhere else, let's say I have 5%. Let's see how we can do that. So we're going to come back here and start editing the expression again. So I'm going to use an if statement, a flow control statement, and we're going to say, okay, I want if the state, again, column values are in double quotes, equals to, and string literals are in single quotes, equals to California, then return my sales times 10%. Now, else if the state is New York, have a tax of 15%, and else let's return a sales tax of just 5%. So for every other state, we got a 5%. Once I'm happy with this modification, I can hit save, and that automatically refreshes the custom expression or the column values. So you see all the column values change. In state of California, I have a nice round 10%. In state of New York, I have a little bit higher percentage tax, and everywhere else I have 5% of my sales here. Again, this expressions, the language is an express TK, is computed on the fly on the data set. So if even you have a streaming data set, the values coming in is going to be computed on the fly. And I'm going to post a link of the syntax for these expressions in the comments below. In the previous video, I showed you how you use custom expressions on top of perspective. But one of the most useful custom expressions is bucketing. Bucketing allows us to do custom intervals or custom buckets of a given column value. Let's say I want to get a total of my sales or compare my sales by month over month. So compare January sales versus February versus March, etc. Let's see how I do that. I'm still using my superset demo data set. So let's apply by doing some custom expressions. If I want to do a group by order date, by default, we're going to get a group by of the most granular data set or bucket that's available in order date. In this case, is by day. That's not exactly what we want. We want to do by month, so a custom interval. And that's where bucketing comes in. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new column and create a bucket expression. So first, I'm going to call this, let's say, order date by month. And I'm going to use a bucketing function. The very first parameter is the column that you want to bucket by, so it's the order date. And again, columns are in double quotes. And then the second parameter of bucket is the bucketing interval. So in this case is month, or the string literal for capital M for month. Once I have this correct, I can create the column, and now that shows up here. So let's take only sales. I'm going to select sales here. And where is sales? Let's deselect this first. Select sales, sum of the sales, and now let's group by order date month. And I can use my bucket anywhere within the split bys, the group bys, or anywhere in my data visualization. And now you can see the total of sales month by month. So I have January sales, February, March, April, etc. It's important to note that I can use bucketing on things that are dates or numerical columns. So let's say I wanted to order actually sales. Let's change this differently. Take a numerical column, and the second value is again the interval that I want to bucket by. So this is going to bucket my sales in 1,000 increments. It's also important to know that you can apply functions on top of this. Let's say sales was really skewed. Maybe some items have like really high, so they're like $10 million, but some other items are only a few dollars. And the best way to visualize that, since you're going to get a really skew in the category, maybe is to take the log of sales and then bucket it by increments of 10 or 100. Again, this should show you how you can apply bucketing functions on top of different data types. Dates, you can bucket by interval, time intervals, or numerical values any way that you like. Now let me show you how you can create a perspective layout of multiple data sources or different data visualizations on top of the same data source. So let's start by importing our default Superstore data set. Go to HTTPS, I'm going to create a table, and I can start customizing this dashboard by applying some group by columns. Let's group by category, for example, and subcategory. And let's just take the sales column. Maybe we're also going to take the profit column and the discount column as well. Now, I can always go back to my sources column and bring in or add another data source. In this case, I'm going to just choose the same data source. So I'm just going to bring in the Superstore again, but I can bring in any data or add any data source that I have available. So I'm going to create new, and now you can see that you get a side-by-side view. So you get a second data source here, and I can customize each one of these charts individually by going their customization. So when I click the title of the second one, let's say in this one we want to do a group by state, and we just want to see a tree view of that. And when I collapse this back, now I have both data sources or both data visualization showing side by side. Another way of doing this is to right-clicking one of the charts and choosing the duplicate option. So that's a nice, quick, and easy way to duplicate a data source for me. And now I can edit the layout, so I can drag and drop this and drop it down here. And again, go and configure this a little bit differently. So maybe we want to see this as a X-bar chart. And you can see now I have a fairly complex layout of 3 different charts, again using the same data source, but they could be different. One is in the data grid view, one is in the tree map view, and the other one in the X-bar view. It's important to know that at any point, again, I can save this layout, so I can give this a name and save that, and that allows me to come back to this layout or to just take this link and send it to my colleague, and they can again start my work and preview my layout and start their work from there. One of the most common use cases with Perspective is the ability of using Perspective to visualize very, very large data sets. Because Perspective is based on WebAssembly, it gets very good performance when it comes to large data sets. Now I'm going to show you a trick to make sure you are ready or set to explore large data sets. The very first thing that you have to do is to make sure that the WebAssembly or WASM 64 is enabled on your browser. You can check that by clicking the settings icon or the modal up here, and if you see enabled under WASM 64, you're good to go. Now, how this is enabled is by making sure that you're running Chrome version 133 or higher. So if you have Chrome, go to your settings tab, go to About Chrome, and if you haven't updated or upgraded, make sure you upgrade it to the latest version or a version that's greater than 133 and above, and that should have the WebAssembly build enabled.
Now, one of the areas where Perspective shines is ability to visualize really fast-moving real-time data sets. So in this case, I'm showing you graphing thousands of stock values that are updating every 50 milliseconds. And to show how this is done, Perspective, the front end, the browser is connecting to a backend, a Perspective server that is pulling data on these stock values and updating a Perspective table and then sending that over to a WebSocket. Let me show you the code for this. So we have a lot of different backend APIs. We have Python, we have Rust, we also have Node or JavaScript. And via any of these APIs, you can create a WebSocket. In this case, I create a Tornado WebSocket, and I use the Perspective Tornado Handler or via the Python API to pull data and then send that to Perspective Viewer. If we take a look at how this works, it is instantiating a Perspective thread and then creating a Perspective table, and then updating that table every 50 milliseconds. It's fairly straightforward. If you look at the updater method, in this case, it's just generating random stock values. Again, we have APIs in Python, Rust, Node.js, and I'm going to post links to these APIs to our documents that you can use and start visualizing your own real-time data sets.